Back in August 2024, I did an episode on the unsolved murder of Mabel Harper. Mabel was murdered in my hometown Cardiff in August 1943. The 53-year-old widow was attacked late at night after missing her bus home. She was found naked, bound and gagged with strips of cloth ripped from her own clothing. In that episode, I mentioned another murder, that of 30-year-old Alice Pittman. Alice was murdered a few months later in November 1943. At the time, police did not connect the two murders, but some recent work by a prominent criminologist suggests both Mabel and Alice could be victims of the same killer. In my day job working in a library, I've started a monthly cold case club where we explore in further depth some of the cases I've researched and covered on the podcast. A little while ago, we examined the murders of Mabel Harper and Alice Pittman, and it made me realise that Alice needed an episode dedicated to her story. Before listening to this episode, if you haven't already, I suggest you go back and listen to the episode on Mabel Harper. Even if you have already listened, it may be worth listening to the episode again. It was released on August 19th, 2024. I'll put a link to the episode in the show notes. Alice Daisy Pittman was born on December 2nd, 1913. She lived with her family at 36 Letty Street, near Cathays Terrace in the centre of Cardiff. I believe she may have gone by her middle name Daisy, but I will refer to her as Alice in this podcast. In November 1943, Alice was fast approaching her 31st birthday. By this time, her father had passed away, but she still lived with her mother, Selina, and one of her brothers, Herbert. Alice had another brother, Ivor, who did not live at home. Alice worked as a cleaner or floor sweeper at a munitions factory in Cardiff. She had previously worked as a machinist. Alice was engaged to be married. Her fiancé was an enlisted sailor in the British Navy and was stationed somewhere in the Mediterranean. At 8 a.m. on Sunday, November 7th, 1943, Alice's partially clothed body was found on open ground near the rear wall of the General Electric Company building in Cathays Park in the centre of Cardiff. The premises was situated on Greyfriars Road, and the grim discovery was made by a lorry driver who was returning to collect his vehicle, which he had left overnight in an adjacent car park. The exact location of the body was on a grass verge, close to iron railings that separated a nearby canal from the car park. It was a mere stone's throw from the law courts and Cardiff Central Police Station. Hi, it's John here. I live in Wales, UK, and I research, write and produce Persons Unknown podcast. It's a true crime podcast dedicated to unsolved murders and missing persons cases from all over the world. If you'd like to become a supporter of the podcast, please see the link in the show notes. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving a review on your app. They make a real difference and I love reading them. Thank you so much for listening. Now back to this week's episode. According to reports in the Western Mail, there were no signs of struggle at the scene. The body was lying on its back, and there were significant injuries to the face. One of Alice's stockings had been removed and was tied tightly around her neck. Home Office pathologist J.M. Webster from the Forensic Science Lab Birmingham concluded that the cause of death was strangulation. Small quantities of blood had flowed from the nose due to the strangulation, and were found pooled on the ground on either side of the head. It was first estimated that the murder was committed between 10:15 p.m. and midnight on Saturday, November 6th. This was later revised slightly, and it was believed the murder could not have happened earlier than 10:30 p.m. The reason for this will be explained later in the narrative. Another detail to note from the crime scene was that while Alice's handbag was found on her person, her purse was missing. It was believed it was taken by the killer. Also, when Alice's body was removed, a signet ring that did not belong to her was found on the ground under her shoulders. Police theorized that this must have slipped off the killer's finger during the act of murder. The case was handled by Cardiff City Police under the leadership of Chief Constable James A. Wilson. An early lead, followed by investigators, was afforded to them by the contents of Alice's handbag. Inside the bag, the police came across a number of letters. One in particular caught their attention. It had been written by a merchant seaman who had arrived in a port in the north of England just days before. To clarify, the letter was not from Alice's fiancé. The author of the letter became an early person of interest, but within 24 hours of the investigation, the man was traced and was able to provide an alibi. It was proven that he had been in Liverpool at the time of the murder. Police tried to establish a picture of what Alice was doing, where she was, and who she was with on the evening she was killed. It didn't take very long for details to come to light of her last known movements. Between 7 and 10 p.m. on Saturday, November 6th, Alice had been in the downstairs smokeroom of the Red Lion Hotel on Queen Street. This was essentially a bar and was situated in one of the main shopping streets in Cardiff. The location was within a 5-minute walk of where Alice's body was found. Several witnesses saw her in the company of 4 men in the Red Lion. 2 were civilians and 2 were uniformed men, either soldiers or sailors. They are described in many reports as American soldiers. Alice had also been seen talking with a woman in a fur coat. The 2 civilian men were traced very quickly. I think the military men were also spoken with. Cardiff City Police made a public plea for anyone who was in the smokeroom at the Red Lion that evening to come forward to help with inquiries. Less than 48 hours after Alice's body was found, an arrest was made in connection with the case. At 7 p.m. on Monday, November 8th, 37-year-old David Emlyn Davis was arrested by Detective Superintendent Ivor Evans of Cardiff City Police. Davis lived in Windsor Green, Ely, in the west of Cardiff, with his wife and children. He worked as a storekeeper at the same munitions factory as Alice. The arrest came after police spoke with customers at the Red Lion Hotel. It was alleged that Davis had been seen leaving the public house in the company of Alice. At Glamorgan Assizes, the case was committed to trial. Cardiff magistrates W.H. Mayer and Frederick Howells oversaw the procedure that formally charged David Emlyn Davis with Alice's murder. Davis pleaded not guilty. During proceedings, Davis's defence lawyer, Stuart Hallinan, applied for legal aid, which was granted. The matter progressed swiftly, and the trial went ahead just a few weeks later, in December 1943. I will briefly outline the arguments put forward by the prosecution and the defence. Mr. E.C. Jones, prosecuting, told the jury that a signet ring belonging to Davis was found under the body of Alice Pittman. This was a unique piece of jewellery that Davis had made himself. Secondly, when Davis was arrested, a green lighter belonging to Alice was found in his possession. She was known to have had it when she was in the Red Lion Hotel, and at one point during the evening was seen putting it inside her handbag. After his arrest, Cardiff City Police searched Davis's house in Windsor Green, Ely, and discovered a blood-stained Macintosh coat belonging to him. The blood on the coat was blood group A. Davis himself was blood group O. Alice Pittman was blood group A. As previously mentioned, it was also stated that on the evening in question, Davis had left the Red Lion pub in the company of Alice Pittman. He was reportedly seen by witnesses walking down Kingsway, a road at the top of Queen Street, which turns into Greyfriars Road, close to where the body was discovered. Detective Superintendent Ivor Evans told the court that on Monday, November 8th, he had gone to Davis's place of work to interview him. When Detective Superintendent Evans arrived, Davis said to him, "I've been expecting you." He then provided Evans with a written statement, which he explained was to clarify matters. Davis had written the statement during the day, before Detective Superintendent Evans had come to the factory. Davis said he had planned to call into the police station after he finished work. While being questioned, Davis brought up the matter of the signet ring, which police found suspicious, as they had not mentioned that fact to him. In total, 32 witnesses were due to be called at the trial. A key individual was a young woman, Rosita May Jones from Llandaff, who was a machine operator at the munitions factory where both Alice Pittman and David Davis worked. Rosita told of a conversation she'd had with Davis on the way to work on the morning of Monday, November 8th. Davis had got on the bus and come and sat next to Rosita. Davis was reading a newspaper and remarked, "Another murder in Cardiff, then?" Rosita responded, "Yes." Davis then handed Rosita the paper and told her to have a look. The story of the murder was accompanied by a photograph of Alice Pittman. Rosita recognised her straight away as someone who worked at the factory. When she told Davis this, he said, "Does she?" When Rosita pushed the matter and said, "Don't you know her?" Davis answered, "No," adding that he knew nothing about her. The following is Davis's account of what happened, largely taken from the written statement he made to police. On the evening of Saturday, November 6th, Davis went to the New Theatre on Greyfriars Road with his wife and eldest son. When he arrived, he told his family that he did not feel like going to the theatre and wanted to go to a dance instead. He left his wife and son at the theatre and visited a public house. From there, he went to the Red Lion Hotel, where he sat next to Alice Pittman. In his written statement, Davis refers to Alice as Daisy or Little Daisy. Davis claimed he knew Alice, but not well. He seems to imply someone he might say hello to at work. When Davis joined Alice, she was in the company of a man named Mahoney. There was also an American soldier or sailor sitting with them. Many reports say Davis said there were 2 American servicemen present, and this does seem to be accepted by police. Davis said that Alice accepted several drinks from a man named Paddy. As a note, it is unclear if this is referring to Mahoney or someone else. The first time Davis heard about the murder was on Monday morning, November 8th, when he was going to work on the bus. Someone on the bus mentioned that another murder had happened in Cardiff. Davis paid little attention until they mentioned that the victim was Alice, the sweeper from the factory. Again, he refers to Alice as Daisy. Someone handed him a copy of the Western Mail newspaper, and he recognised her immediately as the woman he had spoken with at the Red Lion Hotel. His immediate feelings were that of shock and fear. He knew straight away the police would think it was him. He was adamant that he did not kill Alice, but was worried the police would not believe him. This caused a sense of panic, and Davis took a dose of bromide to calm himself. While rarely used today in medicine, due to its risk of toxicity, bromide was prescribed as a sedative for conditions like insomnia and anxiety during the early part of the 20th century. Davis professed to be a very nervous and anxious person. He put this down to his experiences of war. While serving overseas, he had sustained a head injury and illness, which had meant he had spent many months in a neurological hospital in Surrey, England. This condition had eventually meant he was discharged from the armed forces with a diagnosis of neurosis. Davis went on to say he left the Red Lion Hotel alone between 9:20 and 9:35 p.m. When he left, Alice remained at the hotel. He last saw her staggering around with a glass of beer, which one of the American soldiers had poured from his pint. From the Red Lion Hotel, Davis proceeded to walk down Queen Street and went to the Connaught Rooms. This was a venue where dances were held. Davis left the Connaught Rooms sometime between 10:20 and 10:30 p.m. From his written statement, it is clear that Davis was very anxious that it was only his word that placed him at the Connaught Rooms, and because of this he felt trapped in a dilemma. If he went to the police, he felt they would pin the murder on him. But, on the other hand, if he stayed away, he believed the police would find him eventually and go on to suspect him of the crime. In terms of his signet ring, Davis claimed he took it off in the Red Lion Hotel to show the American soldiers. He couldn't remember if they had given it back. He only realised on his tram ride home from town that he had lost the ring. After all the evidence had been heard, the jury retired to deliberate. They took 15 minutes to decide unanimously that David Emlyn Davis was not guilty of the murder of Alice Pittman. Much of the prosecution evidence was circumstantial, or simply had crumbled under inspection. The witnesses who had allegedly seen Davis with Alice walking down Kingsway, close to where she was murdered, failed to pick Davis out from an identity parade. Additionally, witnesses were found who placed Davis in the Connaught rooms when he said he was. More than one person saw him purchasing a ticket halfway up the stairs inside the Connaught rooms. I mentioned earlier that the time frame for the murder taking place was initially given as between 10:15 p.m. and midnight on November 6th. I have read the earlier time was revised to 10:30 p.m. The reason for this is not particularly clear, but I think it must have been due to the sightings of Alice on Kingsway after she left the Red Lion Hotel. This detail is key in understanding the following piece of information. At 10:36 p.m, a witness saw Davis at a tram stop. It was believed he would not have had the time to commit the murder and make his escape on this tram. The defence were also able to successfully throw doubt on the signet ring theory. Davis had always been consistent in his version of events concerning the ring. The question was posed that if he was the killer and realised he had left the ring at the crime scene, why didn't he return during the night to retrieve it? Regarding Alice's green lighter, Davis had said he had found it on the seat next to him in the Red Lion Hotel and put it in his pocket. Davis's defence had also made it known that Alice's missing purse was not found in a search of the defendant's home. After the acquittal, it came out that much of the prosecution case against Davis had been based on information given to them by a man referred to as Paddy, who was drinking in the pub with Alice, Davis, and the American servicemen. If you remember, this may also be the same man referred to as Mahoney in Davis's written statement. This man was the 32nd and final witness in the prosecution case, but failed to show up to court and apparently disappeared. After the trial, there is no mention of Alice's murder for decades. I suspect in the eyes of investigators, they believed their man had got away with it, and therefore their hands were tied. Consequently, the investigation into Alice's murder ceased to be actively worked. On November 5th, 2025, the Daily Mirror ran a story about an investigation their journalists had conducted into historic unsolved murders across the UK. They produced what was described as a murder map, which plotted 1,000 unsolved murders spanning decades. The murder map had been put together by delving into regional newspaper archives and freedom of information requests. At the same time, esteemed criminologist Professor David Wilson released a book, A History of Modern Britain in 20 Murders, that proposed a possible connection between two of the murders on the murder map. These were the 1943 unsolved cases of Mabel Harper and Alice Pittman. David Wilson is a former prison warden and emeritus professor of criminology at Birmingham City University. Part of his new book looked to analyse crime during World War II. The unlit streets due to the Blitz, plus the fact that war by its nature changes the rules of society, provided a unique environment for killers to murder and remain undetected. Professor Wilson gives the example of the serial killers John Christie and Gordon Cummins, both of whom started to kill during the war years. Christie murdered his wife, neighbour, and the neighbour's baby in 1943. He went on to kill 8 other women. Cummins was in the RAF when he killed 4 women in a 6-day spree in London in 1942. Both men were hanged for their crimes. Professor Wilson believes that the murders of Mabel Harper and Alice Pittman could be at the hands of the same killer. They were not linked at the time, partly because police believed they had got their man for Alice's murder, and also because the police force was overstretched and understaffed due to the war effort. The spontaneous nature of Mabel's murder and the extreme level of violence certainly has the hallmarks of a serial killer. Professor Wilson makes the point that people who murder in that way rarely stop of their own volition, hence why Alice's murder followed a short time later. He does wonder whether perhaps the killer was sent overseas in the armed forces, and possibly even killed in combat, before he was able to commit another similar crime. Astute listeners may remember that earlier this year, March 16, 2026, I did an episode on the unsolved murder of Nora Bartlett. She was murdered in Swansea on November 18, 1943. That is just a fortnight after Alice was murdered. Professor Wilson does not believe this murder to be linked to either Mabel Harper's or Alice Pittman's cases due to geography. Swansea is 45 miles west of Cardiff. Having myself researched Nora's case, there are other differences which make me believe it is not connected. Another Cardiff wartime murder is that of 5-year-old Joyce Cox. Joyce was killed in 1939, and I have also covered this case on the podcast. Due to her age, Professor Wilson does not think Joyce's case is connected to that of Mabel Harper or Alice Pittman. Again, having studied the case, I agree with his opinion. The jury is still out on whether Alice Daisy Pittman was murdered by a serial killer. There are many questions I would like to see answered about this case, not least what happened to the key prosecution witness, Paddy. Was he ever found? Did the narrow focus on David Emlyn Davis derail the investigation? Like so many of the unsolved cases I cover, this one has really got under my skin. I pass the place Alice was murdered from time to time, and I'm always reminded of her and the injustice done to her. Alice Pittman is very rarely mentioned in lists of unsolved murders of Cardiff, let alone Wales, which is one of the motivating factors in wanting to share her story with you.